So I have a lot that I want to squeeze into 18 minutes. And I'm going to start off with, if you haven't heard, Nassau is really, really dark this past Thursday. Very, very dark this past Thursday. And now I own a restaurant. It's something I do in my spare time. And our lights were on because we're connected to a hotel with a generator, and so cars passed by. We gave refuge to the dejected and to the sweating. And it kept me up for a little while, but I eventually got to sleep. I missed my flight here on Friday morning. But when I finally rolled over, I got on Facebook, and in typical Bahamian fashion, and we all know Bahamians love to do this, the Facebook post just kind of lined my timeline. BC this, BC that. All kinds of things that I can't say that TED wouldn't allow me to say or post online, right? And I thought this was very interesting. Because through my schooling, I've kind of started to think in ways that I think are a little bit different, and I asked a couple of questions to myself that was answered actually by a colleague of mine from the college, Miss Nicolette Bethel. I don't know if you guys know Nico. She's a fantastic intellectual, right? So as all of these people were on Facebook complaining about BEC, how terrible the government is, and how we need to find foreign partners to help to direct the corporation, or we need to sell the corporation to foreign partners, I began to think, well, why is it that people aren't thinking about alternatives to dirty energy, which is what we have at BEC? Poor fuel, bad engineering, right? So that's the first thing. Why are we thinking about this problem in such an uncritical way? The second thing is, why is it always important for us to go look for help outside of the Bahamas to do the things that we need to do? What is the reliance on foreign help? Why is that so important to us? And this, of course, comes in the face of brilliant young minds at the College of the Bahamas, in the engineering departments and in the small island development department, that have thought about ways for us to use things like the grease from bamboo shack or the garbage from the hotels to create renewable energy. I think these are three very important questions. So let me reiterate those questions again. What is with this way of us thinking, this uncritical way, this kind of very superficial way of us understanding the problems facing our country, right? That's the first thing. The second thing is, what is our reliance on foreign influence? Why is that so important to us? Why do we believe that the only way that we can move forward is if we get somebody from the outside to come in and tell us what we need to do with ourselves? Right? That's the second thing. And the third thing is, we know that there are people here with ideas, with remarkable imagination, with fantastic intellect, and it seems that we don't put any value into them. They find no place here at home, right? And so that's where I want to stop. Put a pin in that for me, right? Because I find it really difficult to use words like development without tearing them apart a little bit. We've used the word development kind of loosey-goosey, and for me, I'm a sociologist of language, and so I know that language and the way we use it has everything to do with the societies we build around us, right? And development is a little problematic as a concept for me for a couple of reasons. And here I like to insert Frantz Fanon. Is anybody familiar with Frantz Fanon? Mm-hmm. He's a fantastic post-colonial theorist, but in my mind, he's a prophet, right? He's a prophet because 60 years ago, Frantz Fanon, after fighting in World War II and being a psychoanalyst in the Algerian wars, and kind of understanding the psychosis that bleeds out of colonialism, writes this amazing tract called Wretched of the Earth, right? I mean, there's another book, Black Skin, White Mask, but Wretched of the Earth is my favorite of the tracts because it's really political. And Frantz Fanon says colonialism is this nasty, insidious thing, and there's something inherent at the middle of it. At the very core of colonialism, he suggests, there's a dichotomy that must exist. And he names this thing a Manichaean dichotomy. Manichaean literally talking about a religious perspective where the universe is split very cleanly into light and dark, right? Two sides existing, dependent on one another. And in Frantz Fanon's mind, the Manichaean separation is between the colonized and the colonizer. The colonized living in a state of abject poverty, surrounded by crime, crumbling infrastructure and all of these things, where just over the railroad tracks is where the colonizers live. And they have perfectly paved roads, and the houses look beautiful, and everybody's living peacefully, and they have organic food, and all of that kind of stuff, right? And Frantz Fanon says, colonialism depends on this thing. Colonialism depends on this thing for two reasons. One, from a psychological standpoint. Because by creating this rift, this division, by dehumanizing the colonized, it allows the colonizer to exact a certain kind of violence to maintain order. These people have to look poor, dejected, they have to be criminals, they have to be dirty, because we need to do certain things to them to maintain the order, right? And the other thing is economy, right? Colonialism necessarily needs this division because the first world and the third world, or the colonizer and the colonized, do not exist without each other. The colonizers' roads can't be paved, their homes can't be neatly groomed, they can't get organic food unless someone's doing the work. And the work is dirty, dirty work. They're not going to do it. And so again, this division is very, very important. We can extrapolate from Frantz Fanon's concept of the Manichaean dichotomy to the division between the third and the first world. And oftentimes what happens in discussions about development is that people will say, we need to move the third world to a developed state, right? But oftentimes people also forget to talk about how the developed world became developed. And in fact, the development of the developed world stands right at the cusp of that Manichaean dichotomy. Banks like Lloyd's and Barclays, coastal cities like New York, London and Bristol were built from sugar farms and cotton and the slave trade. Massive amounts of capital reaped and sowed on the backs of Caribbean slaves and in the American South. And then what we do is we turn around and go after these people who have taken this capital, developed their economies, went through the Industrial Revolution, had their technological boom. These very same countries tend to turn around and look back at us and go, well, you guys need to catch up. You need development. That's a problem for me. So if we're going to talk about development, I think we need to set the context right here, right? And there is a path to true development, but it is not without being critical about the concept of development itself. So let's keep that history in mind. Let's remember that history, okay? Because without that history, that past history, it's very difficult for us to understand our present and our future histories. The idea here is that that history actually transfers. It's not in the past. And as Frantz Fanon will tell us, at the day of independence, we believe that that colonial history falls apart, that we are unshackled from it, but that is not the case. In fact, Frantz Fanon suggests that what really happens is that we turn over the manacles to people who look more like us. And that is something that is even more insidious than the actual colonial process in and of itself. And that these people then become nothing more than the managers of wealth for the very same people who we believe we just kicked out. Right? So let's talk a little bit about development then and how this history affects our day-to-day lives. In three ways, I think, and I think that this is the case for many small island nations, colonial history tends to envelop our lives, right? Let's start with education, for example. In the Bahamas, in particular, but this is something that's happening throughout the modern world, education is failing young people, right? Something like 50% of young Bahamians are leaving high school with just a leaving diploma. That means that they're not graduating, they're leaving with a slip of paper that says, I've been here, right? It means that we also have a generation of people who are completely ill-prepared for the global marketplace, a place that is growing in speed before our very eyes, right? A place that is growing in... I taught at the College of the Bahamas, mostly freshmen and sophomore students, but I can tell you that many of my students couldn't put an academic paper together. They could not string their thoughts together. They didn't know about punctuation or how to put a sentence together. They didn't even know how to use words. They could read, but they couldn't understand. And that goes right to the heart of this question of the critical, right? If you have a population of people who can't critically engage with the world around them, then of course the BEC question is just the question of getting somebody in here to help us. And we can't think beyond the now and ask ourselves, if we have 326 days of sunshine, if we are constantly bombarded by currents from the coast of Africa, if we always have a constant wind, why is it that our environment can't produce the energy that we need to run our cities? Why is that? Right? Of course, it's from a TED Talk that we can understand how this is happening. Sir Ken Robinson's, if you have a chance, go and look it up. Sir Ken Robinson's TED Talk on education and imagination points this out quite interestingly. So, we talked about colonialism and the development of the first world, right? The Industrial Revolution could not happen without slavery, because when you take people who you don't have to pay and make lots of money off of them, you have lots of capital that can fuel innovation, right? When you create this innovation, you also need to have a citizenry that can supply your factories, build your things. And what Sir Ken Robinson suggests is that in the Victorian age and right after, as the Industrial Revolution is booming, schools became more or less factories themselves for people who could work in the industries of their countries, right? They don't need you to think. We don't need you to be creative. We don't need you to imagine anything. We need you to sit on a line, put this thing together, be to work on time, leave on time, and know how to count your money. Those are the things, right? And Sir Ken Robinson suggests that this entire system of education is literally stripping our imagination from us. What makes it even sadder for those of us who live in the post-colony is that we don't have industry. We have not had an industrial revolution in the way that our colonizers have. And we have, without any thought at all, adopted these educational systems. And they don't at all address the things that we need to survive. So here we are in an educational system that is stripping us of imagination in a place where that educational system makes no sense at all to begin with. And because we are pumping out these people without imagination, it becomes difficult for us to even imagine an alternative. We're stuck. Right? In another way, tourism and direct investment, something that I was not sure I was going to cover in this talk, but I think I got time. Tourism and direct investment is another one of these legacies of colonialism. We've all heard the term plantation economy thrown around, right? Let's think about it this way though. 300 years ago, a wealthy person comes to a place, builds a factory, builds an entity, creates an organization where the people of that place go to work. And they leave that place producing these things, the money made from that thing is sent away, and they go home with only their wages. That could be a hotel. Or it could also be a plantation. Either way, you're kind of picking cotton here, right? And none of the things that matter, particularly if the people who live here don't own the means of production, they don't own the entity that's making the money, right? All of that leads to an issue of economic breakdown, okay? More importantly, when it comes to tourism, there's a very interesting kind of politics attached to tourism. When you have 5 to 6 million people trotting on your shores every year, and in fact your economy depends on those people being happy, then it begs the question, is my government doing things to ensure that these 5 to 6 million people who are coming here are happy, forgetting that I actually live here? That if economic policy is more directed to the people who visit here and less about the people who live here, what kind of problems does that cause for us? But even more importantly, all the research that I've seen now shows that tourists are no longer interested in big resorts. They don't care about the all-inclusive package. People actually, in a very colonial way, want to experience life with the natives, right? And in spite of that, and with all that information out there, we're building a very, very big building in the middle of Nassau, in a place where we can't keep the power on a really, really hot night. That's suggests to me that there is a problem. And the problem is deeper than that. The problem is also that without the means of production, Bahamians have very little capital. And those Bahamians who have capital tend to hold on to it, right? And so now we have a society in which the people, many of the people with capital have no interest in ideas, and the people with ideas have no capital. And it leaves us wanting. People with ideas either leave the country altogether or never return, or they feel so dejected and alone that they fall into the cogs of the very same machinery that makes no sense for us to begin with. Right? Last but not least, there's a question of citizenship. And there's a legacy of colonialism in the way that we understand the rights of people in this country. A professor from the University of the West Indies suggests that there are a couple of things that came on the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria with Christopher Columbus, right? Besides disease, smallpox, and all these things, right? He suggests that along with Christopher Columbus comes an intolerant Christianity. Not Christianity itself, but a particular strain of Christianity, something very intolerant. A patriarchal misogyny, right? That finds femininity weak, that puts women in a dejected position in our society. And I'd like to also add to that what comes with Christopher Columbus is an exclusionary nationalism. All of this leads to us pushing aside people on the periphery that don't fit into the national narrative of the Bahamian. And we tell a story about ourselves over and over again. Bahamians are this, Bahamians are this, Bahamians are this, and people who don't fit into that story often get sent to the side. Right? And what that means for us as a people is that the collective imagination, those people left out have no access to it. It starves the imagination of the community. Right? And so here we have in 3 instances where imagination is dying in this country. In our educational system, where there is no capital to fund ideas and innovation, and where we have kicked people out of our communities who don't fit into the stories that we tell ourselves what we want to be, leaving those people with different perspectives on the world no access to the power to create the society in which they live in. And so what this is for me is a call for imagination. That what my old PhD supervisor would say is that we live in a world so bereft of imagination that we cannot conceive of a place different than the one we live in. And so if we can grasp onto this history, understand how it affects both our past, our present, and how it will direct the trajectory of our future, then I think it's time for us to get together and begin to imagine a place different than the one we live in. And to use that imagination to power industry, to power true development, and to power a stronger community. Thank you very much.